World of Warcraft, what a titan. This year it'll be 20 years since the game went live for players around the world, and 30 years since the franchise launched with Warcraft, Orcs and Humans. I play video games and am terminally online, so I'm obviously perfectly qualified to take it apart. The last couple of years have seen the popularisation of multiple forms of Classic, including Wrathkata, Hardcore and Self-Found, and Season of Discovery, concurrent with the resurgence of the retail iteration with Dragonflight. Originally launching in late 2004, WoW took the world by storm. It seemed like everyone was playing it. Sales and hype were at monumental levels. I remember my friends becoming addicts and shut-ins. There was undoubtedly something about it that I just never quite understood. I had played a bunch of Warcraft 2 and even more Warcraft 3.
Nechť se tvé oči zavřou, jako se mé otevřely.
And found the story interesting and the real-time strategy aspects fun, but my focus was on first-person games like Counter-Strike and more importantly Quake 3. I gave World of Warcraft a try in 2005. I played an Orc Warlock. I can vividly remember the Durotar map on my tiny CRT screen. I recall running around Sen'jin Village in the Echo Isles without the faintest idea of what I was meant to do. I remember taking the Zeppelin to Undercity and getting lost there. I can't remember much more after that. I couldn't wrap my head around not knowing what I was doing, not knowing where I needed to go or needed to be. I wrote the game off. I was too impatient, too obscene and vulgar, unable to recognise that the game presented a delayed gratification that was magnitudes more satisfying than anything I had ever experienced in my entire Quake career. Times change.
Times change.
And with it the ideology and definition of what was World of Warcraft also changed. At some point it became almost like a skin applied to a game within a different genre. The themes and the locations were the same, but the experience became fundamentally different. Blizzard were a different company, proverbially and literally. One day I installed the game and completed a free trial. I recall completing the Echo Isles campaign as a troll hunter. The game played more to my impulses, seemingly giving me new things at every turn and bombarding me with instant gratification. But I remember it felt like a clunky third-person action game. I wasn't feeling any RPG experience at all. I was always interested in Warcraft's lore, but I just had no desire to engage beyond that. I spent around a decade and a half giving my friends a hard time for playing World of Warcraft. A bunch of us decided to give Classic a shot for the sake of the boys' nostalgia. They didn't stick around long, but I did. I conquered Molten Core and became guildless over an Eye of Sulfuron drop. I saved gold for many weeks for my Drake Fang talisman in Blackwing Lair. I tanked the old god-crazed denizens of Ahn'Qiraj from its opening at the conclusion of the war effort. I survived enraged, hateful strikes from the hardest hitting boss in the game, but never saw my ultimate goal of attaining Kingsfall during our GKP conquest of Nexramas. But moreover, I lived in the world. It demonstrated to me what I like and what I respect and enjoy when it comes to video games as art. I did play through TBC and Wrath, although both of those expansions made me quit and return to vanilla. Now in 2024, the vanilla iteration, specifically Season of Discovery, is basically the only video game I play. So why is that? In this video we'll be exploring what is Season of Discovery and how is it performing as a roadmap for Classic Plus. What did mid-30s me see that teenage me didn't see? Why did I become an addict and shut in? What is it about vanilla WoW that makes it so special? What are the changes that TBC, Wrath and beyond made that lost that sheen, that wonder, that inspiration for new players to take it up? Is the player base to blame? What was the thought process at Blizzard during the formative years before the Cataclysm redefined the world of Warcraft? And finally, what lessons do I hope Blizzard learn and recognise that they can deploy to make the next iteration of Classic more vanilla and less retail? But first, who am I? I'm the legendary shaman taking Yojamba, idiot, the main character of World of Warcraft. I'll let Asmongold introduce me.
That big dick Baraddek guy was a fucking hero.
I've been PC gaming for 30 years. I was a competitive FPS player and used to admin monthly LAN parties and quarterly larger events. I've previously planned, hosted, streamed and presented competitive online events and produced a bit of amateur content related to that. I've played a lot of different games across a lot of different genres and I'm able to articulate my reasoning generally. I'm also a fucking troll and will take the opportunity to do so even if the result is a permaban. I've been described as a modern day Diogenes. I was inspired to Shaman Tank by an argument I had in 2005 with my friend who made a druid and I was like, why would they be able to wear shields if they weren't tanks? Let's go back to 2004. This is an era before the modern internet. There weren't a few major websites that everyone uses. There were tens of thousands of small isolated communities. These smaller spaces do still exist, however the vast majority of internet users are concentrated to your Facebooks and your Reddits and your Discords of today. Smaller spaces today tend to be extremely niche, questionable immorality or legality, or hangovers from more primitive times. In 2004, search engine technologies were improving rapidly, but the disjointed nature of the internet created enclaves, which limited the reach of everyone's communication. Gaming communities in general were small and contained within forums. This is basically around the dawn of Steam, so there's nothing in gaming that brings a bunch of separate communities together to the same place. In fact, it was more likely that you would interact with a gamer from a different community at an in-person event like a LAN party. There just wasn't a homogenized or standardized place to harbour all the different communities. Even game patches and servers were hosted by internet service providers or peer-to-peer rather than centrally by a publisher. Beyond that, most people had slow computers and slow internet. Computer and internet literacy was much lower and information was harder to source, further dividing the digitally advantaged and disadvantaged. WoW's initial iteration needs to be viewed through this lens. Before streaming, pre-mobile gaming, which arguably began the mainstream era of gaming. I'll touch on that in a bit, but first let's get into a message from our sponsor, Baraddek Builds.
Looking for a smooth transition from console gaming to PCs? Perhaps you're a tech business owner looking to expand into worldwide markets and need an entry point in Australia? Baraddek Builds offers pre-owned, pre-built and made-to-order custom gaming PCs for the discerning gamer on a budget. With 30 years of PC building experience, I offer solutions aimed towards getting the best bang for your buck for your specific needs. Whatever the budget, I can craft a custom rig and give you a tailor-made experience. All new Baraddek Builds PCs are built and shipped in 10 days from order to dispatch, or delivery is free, and include 10-day setup and configuration support. So get into gaming ASAP. Order now. Baraddekbuilds.com.
So you can kind of see why WoW became so popular amongst people who weren't even really concerned with clearing content. WoW was an all-in-one community. It had rule sets you could follow, or you could make your own. You could roleplay as yourself or whoever you wanted to be. It was a thriving and real economy that people could engage with and contribute to. Gear collection, gathering rare mats, flipping on the auction house, all valid and fulfilling ways to engage with WoW. The modern iterations expand on all this greatly, as you would expect over 20 years, and I mean, it's a testament to Blizzard that they kept this colossal ship sailing regardless. But for its time, this game was like smack. I was, let's say, more of a crack guy, and I needed the immediate feedback loop, so I was focused on Quake 3 at this point. It was still featured in 1v1 format at major events like ESWC, DreamHack and QuakeCon, and I'd just come off a top 8 finish at an ASUS-sponsored esports event in Sydney. My focus was squarely on competitive esports. which perhaps explains why I overlooked WoW for so long. WoW's not an esport. I'm getting a bit off topic here, so let's refocus. WoW released to an internet that wasn't interconnected like it is today, and yet it still penetrated the mainstream and left its imprints on popular culture. Remember this?
Getting home from school and my brain is full. Grab a cup of noodles and a can of Red Bull. I'm Warcrafting, y'all, and I can't just stop because I'm chilling with my homies up in Nazareth. And so I'm calling on my friends cause they ain't know what to do. Yo, Rims, you online? No, I'm waiting in a queue. Well, I'm thinking I'ma do ya, I'm thinking I'ma hurt ya. They call me Andre Agassi, I dominate the server. I'm a level 30 human and I'm spec to kill. I ain't gotta camp you close, but I expect I will. Shooting shadow magic all up into your head because I got more spell than an Indian kid.
I remember a bunch of these lyrics today, and this song would not leave my head at the start of Phase 2 with everyone looking for Gnomrigon raids.
More XP to Windows, heal like stiletto, deal it earth in the Stormwind ghetto. Load you with dots like Kaposi sarcoma. What you gonna type, noob? LFG Gnomer.
This is an era where most people had to go to JB Hi-Fi or Harvey Norman or some other big electrical retailer in order to buy Game Time, which used to come in the form of a card with a serial number on it. Like I said, there was no streaming. You downloaded your DVD rips and music peer-to-peer, and you cracked the whip.
Winner. It really whips the llama's ass.
So in the early noughties, it's a very disconnected world comparatively. So where did Blizzard turn to for knowledge in how to build the best MMORPG? It was a foundational attribute of Blizzard, that they take inspiration from others and iterate on that inspiration to create the best games. And in this circumstance, they poached the grandfather of WoW from a top guild in EverQuest called Legacy of Steel. A cool cat you might know by the name of Jeff Kaplan. Blizzard poached heaps of talent from EverQuest, but Jeff's the most notable, and the timing of his eventual departure from the WoW team to head up the next MMO just so happens to coincide with the plateau of WoW's all-time subscription numbers. I guess my point is that WoW wasn't the first MMO, but it was so good that eventually 11 million people were playing it. These guys knew what good game design was and what bad game design was, and the developers in the early years shepherded the project to unbelievable heights. I think WoW didn't step a foot wrong until they began pioneering into territories previously not well travelled in MMORPGs. I also think almost all of these bad design choices were driven by a player base who
You think you do, but you don't.
demanded balance and convenience in everything, and basically wrote a roadmap to mediocrity for the franchise, which could then barely muster half the population at any time after. I'm going to argue that letting the community lead was a terminal mistake for Blizzard, and that allowing Classic to make the same mistakes is only justifiable if by design. If Blizzard wants to kill the Classic Golden Goose, doing a rerun of the retail roadmap is a surefire way to achieve that goal. So, what do I know? Well, I've only played through Classic and dabbled a teeny tiny bit with Shadowlands and Dragonflight. I had that exposure initially in Vanilla, and did the free trial once, but little beyond that. I don't really think I need to comment on retail specifically, as all the problems I think it has I've witnessed being introduced to the game during Classic. I've peered into the minds of private server retail and Vanilla WoW players who have taken up Classic. My first real experience with an endgame was as a Shaman tank in Classic's initial run during the pandemic. I've seen, and when I'm on a low, regretfully participated in, the best and the worst in interpersonal interactions in a game where reputation is as much, if not more, of a commodity than rare items and gold. While that has led to some pretty toxic experiences, it's also led to kind words from so many people that can remember a fleeting awesome time sharing in-game experiences. There's no way this would happen in the queue simulator that is the modern iteration. What I've noticed acutely about WoW players, particularly those in the vortex of the retail feedback loop, is that it really seems like these people just don't like playing the game. Almost every action is calculated in order to do everything as quickly as possible. Look, speedrunning is a perfectly legitimate way to enjoy your favourite video game, and it's also a legitimate competitive avenue, but when a game's entire culture revolves around speeding to the end, it's then prone to toxicity and these expectations of min-maxing. The retail feedback loop creates a full try-hard mind state, where phase content is rushed through, and then requisitions a slavish adherence to a made-up rule set, which then includes people demanding logs, consumes, buffs, bisque gear and enchants for a level up dungeon, and groups that refuse to take classes or specs that aren't performing at the top. Add to that dungeon boosting, level boost, WoW token, the list goes on. I'm going to pay Blizzard $20 a month for someone else to play the game for me, and when I do play, it better not be for 20 seconds longer than it needs to be. I only got places in raids in Classic Vanilla as an enhancer because I was a tank and did more damage than a warrior or druid, until phase 5. But even in the depths of Nax, it's literally about 20 seconds extra per boss for each enhancer you take instead of a warrior. All of this excluding based on meta is ridiculous and toxic, and to be honest quite bizarre. If these people hate playing the game so much, why do they keep doing it? Let's be frank about World of Warcraft. PvP is a low skill ceiling game. Coming from Quake where the tempo is much higher, and the actual skill relied upon is leagues more cerebral and reflexive, WoW is much closer to a DDR clone than an esport. A trained baboon can press a button when it lights up and avoid a swirly. PvP is a different story, although I'd argue that by homogenizing all the classes in order to obtain balance, the skill ceiling is just lowered over time. Vanilla PvP is awesome because it isn't balanced. You need a team, and teams are rock, paper, scissors. If you find yourself being a paper to someone's scissors, most likely there are engineering, alchemy, and tailoring actives that can swing you back towards rock territory. Getting snared after you blink? Spider belt. Pesky druid, enemy FC who knows all the jumps? Flash powder. I haven't enjoyed any PvP since Classic Vanilla, and even then the absolute epitome of world PvP, raiding opposition faction capitals, is strongly discouraged by civilians and dishonor kills. More on that in a bit, but right now I want to hone in on what I think Vanilla does really well. Fantasy nerds in their 40s and 50s don't need to search far within the bounds of vanilla WoW to find all their favourite tropes and themes, because WoW is inspired directly by so much of the early RPG and D&D tabletop and video games. In these games, you're not some souped up, unstoppable god main character for whom the entire world quivers in deference to your greatness. You're just an adventurer. You're expected, like most others before you, to fail. The world is dangerous and threatening, and that adds value and meaning to your success. You're in this magical realm of fantastical heroes and themes, and you're reading and hearing stories of adventurers and characters that have beaten the path for you. An adventurer. The way itemization is so random and has so many things to take into account fits thematically. These are magically enchanted items of clothing. Wouldn't it be a bit convenient if it has precisely the right stats for min-maxing? Specializing gear makes the player feel stronger, but at the expense of trivializing any perceived threat of your predicament. Leaning into the fantasy when it comes to gear invites experimentation and provides alternative ways to enjoy whatever it is you consider fulfilling. This is also why I disagree with the bald man. Firstly, about white protection. The fantasy of being just a group of adventurers of varying origins and abilities entering essentially the home city of a powerful enemy faction should feel dangerous. It should feel precarious. Like it's one wrong step and the whole thing falls apart. The enemy should have reinforcements after a couple of hours if they're actually a faction to be reckoned with. There are thematically satisfying ways to do this, which I think Vanilla does really well with BWL, AQ40 and Nax. This theme leads into the other thing Baldy's wrong about. If trash is no threat to the player, it shouldn't be there. In the modern iterations where all trash is a matter of gather it all up and AoE it down, You might as well forget about it rather than waste the player's time. It adds nothing of value, and even if there's zone drops, that's just more lazy development dressed up as reward to justify wasting time. This is one of my very few complaints about Season of Discovery, especially since the start of Phase 3. It's more like Season of Wrath of the Lich King. The real danger that you need to overcome in all of vanilla WoW is threat. With no reliable way to generate AoE threat, an unplanned pull means everyone needs to focus up, communicate with immediacy, and not shit the bed, or it's a wipe. Even with marks and strats all worked out beforehand, the threat is ever present. The danger increases with more healers and more tanks because of the amount of incoming damage that is withstandable. More on that in a sec. So I guess this is only somewhat of a disagreement with Asmund because, yeah, get rid of that shit if it's just face roll, but I would prefer to err on the side of a bottleneck of player power. That's more likely to keep trash pools exciting, challenging, and relevant. When we aren't infinitely strong, raids are imposing and fraught with danger like they should be. "40-mans are epic for so many reasons, with the most obvious being size. Achieving a challenging goal with 39 other bodies involved is just more satisfying than with 19. However, I think the most convincing argument for 40-mans is the depth and scope possible. You're able to have a more flexible degree of required mechanics when you employ twice the amount of people. If every fight starts with 4 tanks instead of 2, the tanking mechanics can be much more punishing, because there's more tanks available to take over. You can have a greater number of individual mechanics being performed by smaller groups within the raid. Think of the 4 horsemen fight in Acts 40. The raid is forced to spread out and essentially operate in multiple individual teams within the one group. The other thing about 40-mans is you're able to carry more people, so there's literally no reason to exclude an underperforming spec or even player. This one goes in the lazy/economical design bin with daily/repeatable quests, as another fatal error introduced in TBC. Dungeons and raids should have one difficulty and one loot table to pull from. If something ends up being too hard for everyone to clear, that's awesome, and then it damn well should be designed in such a way that it's interesting, fun and engaging, even if you don't get all the loot. Look at Old Sunken Temple, look at Blackrock Depths, look at Blackrock Spire. These are the best instances perhaps in gaming history. They were and are enjoyable even if you don't make it through and kill all the bosses. And that's when I believe the design philosophy is most captivating. This lists are nice, but what I really enjoy is how an item drops in a new raid and you actually have to read its stats, and take into consideration how it interacts with the items you have before deciding on whether it's a true upgrade or not. Wrath, and TBC to a lesser extent, got to the point when a new phase came out that it was a waste of time reading into it, as you knew for a fact, with such specialised loot that higher item level equals upgrade for any slot. Having bosses that are only 2 levels or plus 10 defense, as will be the case in SOD Endgame, removes the need for a hit set for bosses and a stat set for trash, which I don't really like. Not only does it remove a lot of the perceived and actual threat because your swings and casts are always hitting, which sort of coarsely rubs against the whole leaning into the fantasy, it greatly narrows any contenders for best in slot to items that stack their stat budget into strength and or agility. Hit requirements and hit caps make the goalposts for crit cap and AP/crit calculations shift, which I think is better for the health of the game in general, as it doesn't cater to the uber sweat. World of Warcraft was an absolute wonder on its release. The graphics were a decade ahead of their time, and you can see that in the game today, with it all still holding up solidly. Sure, there's a bunch of modern filters and techniques used to sex it up, but those things make good-looking games look better. They don't make bad-looking games look good. The elegant simplicity and subtlety, along with some of the more brash and extravagant set pieces, lend depth and realism to these classical thematical tropes. In 2024, after playing this game for 5 years, I still often find myself stopping to take in the scenery. There's some amazing artistic choices to be uncovered if you spend the time to stop and smell the roses. Unfortunately, being a decade ahead of its time also meant that there was an extraordinarily steep barrier to entry for those who wanted to witness this truly breathtaking art on release, as gaming PCs were much more niche and cost prohibitive than today. These barriers simply no longer exist in modern gaming, as even entry-level computers are able to run new releases at reasonable frame rates in HD. I think that the correct way to make a game like this is to employ Vanilla's focus on more of the macro when it comes to art, rather than smaller details which end up overwhelming the environment and becoming infinitely more difficult to even notice unless the display puts a coloured outline around it. TBC introduced one of the deadly sins for WoW, the daily quest. Daily quests are garbage and the laziest design. While I understand that from an economic viewpoint it makes sense to streamline as much of your development philosophy, to pump out as much content with as little man hours as possible, this wouldn't even be necessary with an expansion design philosophy that focused on horizontal development that kept previous tiers relevant. The way quests in Vanilla have you travelling all over the world to complete them enriches the world of Warcraft with your presence, and your presence is the most important asset that a video game can have. TBC also introduced the idea that quest hubs would be stumbled across, and a couple of introduction quests confined to the area would lead to more quests confined to the area. I can see the practical use of this type of design if you're going with the assumption that these areas are never going to be visited again, because the next expansion is going to another realm entirely, but I think it's antithesis to a world that feels genuinely lived in. Vanilla has you going back to bumfuck for X reason multiple times, so bumfuck doesn't feel like a padded cell like in retail. The epitome of quest chains is of course Scarab Lord. Besides being a kick-ass chain full of mad lore and skits shit to do, by its very nature of requiring cooperation and collective effort, it is a driver of community engagement. It has amazing rewards even if you don't end up ringing the gong in time, and utilises so many parts of the by now familiar world that it's a tribute to itself. WoW's probably the only game I've ever played that is justified in such arrogance. The other gold medal example from Vanilla is the illustrious Thunderfury Blessed Blade of the Windseeker quest. It was first added in patch 111, and if I'm not mistaken, it's still farmed to this day in retail. It was being farmed every week by hundreds of groups when TBC Classic pre-patch dropped. Making the best weapon in the game multiple low-chance drops from the earliest raid is an effective, if clunky, way to ensure that all your pumpers continue to attend raids of the older content, which is perfect for GKPs, or better yet, simply for gearing up new players and alts. Vanilla requires you to interact with and maintain relationships with different actual people. The modern game is a queue simulator that started in Wrath, and it's not even queuing you up with people that you'll ever see again. Reputation is a currency and not something you just grind with factions in Vanilla. When players are confined to a single server, it tends to blunt the edges of the natural state of the WoW player, sociopathic maniac. I've come to the conclusion that is the reason why so many people love a fresh server, rather than anything to do with an economy or progression. You can just re-roll a fresh server with a new name and nobody remembers the disgusting psycho shit you did last time around. The very nature of the gameplay loops of WoW rewards sociopathy unless reputation is visible, and a vibrant server community ensures this does happen. Obviously there's a lot more that Vanilla does really well, but given a full list would be exhausting, let's stick with what it does well in the context of things that change. With that in mind, I want to quickly go through changes that I think are bad, and demonstrably make the game worse. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it seems to me that fixating on these things that people didn't like, rather than on the things people really liked, is what convinced Blizzard to make some of these decisions that I disagree with. Remember I mentioned our old mate Jeff? Well, he left the game after Wrath launched. Wrath's launch was a hell of a lot more like TBC than the Q simulator it would come to be. However, I think Jeff was present for multiple damaging missteps, so he's not completely without blame for setting things in motion. The first mistake was implementing Arena. Putting the competitive focus on small team sizes just leads to demands for balance, and these classes and specs should not be balanced. RPG parties are about synergy, and rock, paper, scissors encounters. This slavish pursuit of balance just removes the soul from the role you're playing. Daily quests is another cock that came into the game in TBC. They're garbage and lazy. I've already whinged about them, but let me reiterate, they're shit. Rep grinds that gate content are also lazy and trash. Rep grinds should be for bisque gear and other cool shit, not just to get into a raid. This idea, actually done right, was done in vanilla with Hydraxian Warlords. You can still get into Molten Core without a douse, and farming the bosses in the raid gave you the appropriate rep to progress. If you had a douse, you had a raid spot. That shit was lit. And progressively it became easier as more people got douses, and running MC passively gave the rep for a permanent douse. World buffs not working in raid. They make the game super fun. Big number is big, damage meter go brrr. But also, world buffs are a target for PvP activity. They are inherently attractive to griefers. I was one of the loudest voices advocating for some sort of solution to world buff griefing right up until world buff activity disappeared. This was a natural occurrence with the rule set of TBC being imported into the system, but the same would have happened had the Chrono Boon Displacer been introduced to Classic Vanilla. I've come to understand that the life that's injected into the game by so many people having an interest in being in one place, nefarious or otherwise, is absolutely priceless, and something special that most video game developers couldn't even imagine. Also Chrono Boon Displacer, it sucks. At least in its current form. I could get behind one that maybe extends the cooldown, or protects from dispels, or refreshes stored buffs when a suspended one drops, or something sort of utility like that, but it would need balancing by expiring the buffs if logged out for 16 hours or something. The idea would be for it to be a tool to assist getting and keeping buffs for raid, but the incentive for it to be adjacent to world PvP cannot be removed entirely. It's not a World of Warcraft if there's no world PvP. Flying mounts are not conducive to interactions with other players, enough said. Civilians either removed altogether or used much more sparingly and only in starter and friendly questing zones. Not capital cities. There's no raids in Stormwind in vanilla because everyone is terrified of getting a dishonor kill, and that's shit for the game. Even if they just made it that only the person who kills the civvy gets the DK, that would go a long way to getting faction capital raids going regularly. Sharding and phase servers are another thing that disturbs immersion and creates confusion in some circumstances. We're all supposed to be in this world together, we should all be seeing the same thing. The sharding that happens in Wrath might be a decent storytelling device when Wrath's direction is clear. However, I'm currently arguing I don't think that style of storytelling should be used. Not to mention, why am I suddenly the main character? I mean, I'm used to being the main character, but why is everyone else suddenly the main character? Why can't we just be adventurers experiencing this awesome world without every other NPC sucking us off for being some sort of champion? I do see this in the context of the time it came out. This is in the midst of the mobile gaming boom, when constant instant gratification was necessary to maintain people's attention. Blizzard wants to be bought by Activision, so they create a product that aims towards the engagement metrics, employed across mobile division, and publisher of Candy Crush King. But this is all shit. It was a bad idea, and we really need to go back to just being hopeful adventurers, rather than God King elite invincible legends. I don't know when exactly the obsession with progression race became the sole driver of the developers' intentions when it came to encounter experiences, but I presume it would be around the time of late Wrath and into Cataclysm. It makes sense that Blizzard would try and frame everything as some sort of esport, and it's hard to argue against PvP having that label. However, when it comes to PvP, like I said earlier, the skill ceiling is really low even in the absolute top tier of the game. It is not an esport, and more like a really nasty, unhealthy drug bender that a collection of 30-something-year-old dudes do as a sort of tradition every few months. The final and most damaging mistake was fostering the obsession with Warcraft logs and parsing. There are a number of obvious reasons why parses are a poor indicator of a person's skill or ability to clear content, but the most glaring is the fact that scoring high demands a slavish adherence to a made-up rule set, strictly followed by the entire raid, including strategies which are against the interest of the clear in general. Using someone's pass as a vector for abuse is akin to the guy who ran 3rd place in the 100 metres at the Special Olympics, calling you a retard because you walk with both your legs. The last guild I was in really gave me the shits talking about their dumb cunt passes while they wiped to easy shit in Noma. Hey fuckfaces, nobody gives a fuck what your sad dad score is. It might as well be fucking 0 if you're just gonna wipe by face pulling while talking rubbish. These last two, the progression race and passing culture, feed into simultaneously the most vile and toxic and try-hard community I have ever witnessed. Sad dads get notification about a new phase or patch. They say they're taking some time off before the new phase or patch. They plan time off work for patch day. They log off until patch day or phase release. Then they dungeon grind to max level as soon as the patch launches. They run a few dungeons. They do the new raid. And then it's looking for more content, need buffs, consumes, BIS gear, enchants, BIS professions, log checks. Then they get a notification about the next patch or phase. Repeat. If Blizzard can at least recognise these mistakes, I'm willing to give them the benefit of a wide enough berth to learn from them. There are elements of Season of Discovery which certainly are taking off down these paths, but hey, it's a seasonal server, and if Blizzard listen to the correct feedback, I think they can give us a consistently good product on a seasonal basis, and maybe even eventually an update to Era that's so faithful that the no changes crowd would migrate their tunes there. Speaking of which, I know the developers read the forums, and I do believe they recognise passion for their creation. They can probably be forgiven for going so far off track and stubbornly deciding to go their own way around BFA and Shadowlands in an attempt to increase their numbers, as giving players exactly what they said they wanted did not replicate the numbers from the glory days. Man, you're a Blizzard shill. How can you always make excuses for them? All I know is that I played the shit out of my Shaman tanking classic and never backed down in the face of a bunch of negativity. I got on the forums and demonstrated my passion, Reed got banned, and said exactly what I think and what I want to see. Then I get a survey, and I never get surveys, from Blizzard on the 16th of September 2023, which basically only asks, hey, will you play fresh season of vanilla if we had new stuff? And I reply, make Shaman tanks and I'll play the shit out of it, otherwise fuck right off. 6 weeks later at BlizzCon they announced SOD and Shaman tanks, and literally everybody is super duper excited about it. I'm overjoyed, people send me messages about it, everyone's generally stoked. Someone even took my name on soft launch. My point is they kept their end of the bargain, so to speak, and they are pleasing many more people than they're pissing off. I would be a hypocrite not to embrace this season wholeheartedly, and especially with an open mind. If what I believe is true, then we have a great opportunity through passion and positive critique of going on a journey with a responsive Blizzard, and that's what everyone's been going on about for as long as I've been playing the game. Alright, so I have some suggestions for how to keep the game grounded in a vanilla foundation. First of all, the obvious stuff would be to give Paladins and Shaman their basic tank runes as kit in their ability tree. I haven't played Alliance, so I don't know the most logical way for Paladins, but with Shaman I would add Shield Mastery's rune effects to shield specialization in the first row of the enhancement tree, with points in shield specialization activating Way of Earth. That would have enhanced performing awesome as a tank in those early groups with Rockbiter on hand. The changes to Consecration and Molten Blast, let alone Fire Nova and Overcharged, which provide a comical amount of AoE threat, are not really appropriate if the idea of a classic iteration is to adhere to the design philosophies that underpin threatening trash mobs. If you can just gather them all up and AoE them down, the only threat comes from too much total incoming damage on that tank. It's one-dimensional. If mechanics don't need to be respected, there's no point of those mechanics or even mobs to exist. When there's no reliable AoE threat, individual mobs become mini-bosses. But beyond that, it demands more tanks in the fight, meaning there can be a greater number of different raid-wide mechanics that smaller groups within the raid need to coordinate. Respecting threat is a trivial task with the tools that are easily accessible until something goes wrong. I quite enjoy the quests that have been added in Season of Discovery, and I'd be happy if they repurpose them as level 60 content in post-Nax quests. What about unused content back from the original release? Unfinished quests like Old Mate Green Dragon and the Draenei in Storm of Sorrows, they're no-brainers to flesh out. There's the discs from Alderman leading to the entrance of Uldum in Tanaris. Surely there's concept work of the original pirate theme expansion that was planned, which could be used to bring Tanaris even further to life. Zolashi, anyone? How about a Timbermore or Furbolg-inspired raid with its entrance in Timbermore Hold in Ashara? The Timbermore are influenced by a rogue Blue Dragonflight faction operating out of Winterspring that have been turning some Furbolg clans crazy, while others have disappeared entirely. It's the perfect environment to employ my old idea of a mechanic called Soothing Voice, essentially just a raid cap mechanic that would cripple warriors and druids, necessitating a shaman or paladin or rogue or warlock tank. Flavour would be along the lines of feelings of contentedness and happiness weaken your resolve, so the implication is sort of smacky, where everyone is being lulled into this sort of warm reclusiveness and has no desire to do anything, eventually leading to self-harm because you don't feel hunger or tiredness or fatigue. Another idea would be tendrils of Cthulhu leaking the old god essence and essentially influencing and empowering the adjacent hive in Silithus, resulting in much stronger elite marauding mobs migrating to the other hives, killing everyone in the way. You must fight your way into the affected hive and enter the instance to battle gigantic, mutated, evolved bugs and find your way to the final boss, the real influence behind the bug madness. As for a new race, well, Blood Elves for Horde and High Elves for Alliance. They're thematically the most relevant in my opinion. In this timeline, Kael'thas fails to convince his followers in Outland to join him in service of Kil'jaeden. He's subsequently rejected by all the elves. Lorthmar Theron emerges as regent, but those destined to follow Kael are convinced by a charismatic elf to instead rejoin the Alliance forces, once again identifying as Kel'Darai. Silvermoon City would serve as a political capital and Kel'Thalas as neutral territory with the potential to become front row seats to a conflict involving the Sunwell. These Kel'Darai spend a lot of effort and political capital convincing Alliance leadership that there is another Burning Legion invasion about to commence, only for the Dark Portal to ominously stir. And what about the Dark Portal? This time it opens, and instead of the Burning Legion, it's an alternative iteration of a Dark Iron Horde, led by none other than Garrosh himself. But this Garrosh is much more full of pride, with no weak past and associated baggage with perceived failure from his father. Similar to the Plunderstorm deal, and most recently the Mists of Pandaria remix, I'd like to see that for Progression Race. That part of the game sort of carved out of the full experience. Remove gear disparity from the equation and you could create such tight, precise tuning in those raid encounters. The content can just be used more loosely with one difficulty in the main game. Just give the players who want that what they want and then focus separately on the world of Warcraft. Hyjal, Grim Batol, Twilight Highlands, I'm just spitballing, dude. But I've just suggested like a whole 5-phase expansion with a cliffhanger ending, and if a dumb idiot with crippling depression can do it, I'm sure Blizzard has the talent to realise something much better. There's so many places in Vanilla's world map where you can just tell that they were going to make content there. I think the reasoning behind abandoning all of that for the new expansion off-world was probably mainly a commercial one, but this is a golden opportunity for a bunch of stuff to get realised. This video was really hard for me to write. There's a lot of struggles in people's lives and I'm no stranger to that either. I can feel the negativity pulsating from myself all the time. If I'm honest, I'm not really coping with it all. People don't talk about mental health enough. Most people don't know what to do if they think someone they know is flying off the handle or having a mental health episode. Some revel in the chaos. My experience with Imperials has demonstrated that they feel safe in their little bunkers and almost get pleasure from escalating heightened emotional states. The genocide in Palestine being committed by the Israeli terrorist regime is the most pressing issue in the world right now. The West is aiding and abetting atrocities. US, UK and Australian weapons contracts are bolstering what is the most disgusting and revolting disregard of humanity I've experienced in my lifetime. Being forced to stand by as Israel commits an ethnic cleansing affects me. My spirit. I've seen and read so much that I've been reduced to tears on more than one occasion. And sadly, barely anyone seems to care. You want to know what's even worse than the most malicious, malignant, vile, chosen one mentality displayed by those terrorists? WoW players. I've never met a worse person than an average WoW player. I'm obviously being hyperbolic for comedic effect, and don't get me wrong, I've made a bunch of awesome friends playing WoW. One of the really cool things of not being a sociopath, so not having to change names every time I reroll, is that people remember me. People played with me years ago for a few months and they remember the name. They remember the legendary shaman tank of Yojamba. Being able to roll on another server and be recognised and thanked for the good times, that's something really special. I had fun too, you guys. But WoW players as an aggregate, dude, the worst. Perhaps only equalled by the average pen pusher or customer support worker at Blizzard. They have no self-awareness and are absolutely infuriating. Have you ever been on Reddit? Then you know the kind of smug know-it-all wanker that I'm talking about. The kind of people that attack from the front. The kind of people who pop off as soon as a fight starts, even though the boss needs to be dragged. The sociopaths will steal an item in phase 1 of an expansion because they know by the final phase they'll have a different name on a different tune and nobody will be the wiser. I would really like it if there were more transparency about who a person actually is, if they have years and years of WoW experience. What really sucks for Blizzard when it comes to WoW Classic is millions of those players are set in their ways, so the expectation is that Blizzard will acquiesce to their demands. Blizzard certainly aren't completely without fault here because they fostered this ridiculous progression race mentality, but I sympathise with the uphill battle it would be to please the ever-shifting demands. Blizzard CS is an absolute joke though. The OCE servers are full of racist and hate speech all the time, which gets through just fine, but you say a swear and it gets reported, even though the person reporting had to go out of their way to enable seeing the word to be offended by it, and the reporting person also uses the same or similar language, and the international rules-based order will deny you access. I'm currently on another 2-week suspension on one of my accounts with no idea why. You write to support and ask, what the fuck did I do? And all you get in response is the same copy-paste AI response, over and over the course of a couple of weeks. I did write a couple of jokes about current world events in there, and heaven forbid that. The game revolves around social interactions, but Blizzard CS will ban you for weeks at a time for saying something off-topic in a public chat. I was previously permabanned on another account because I had the audacity to quote the Onyxia White meme. You know, that famous meme that's one of the foundational cultural cornerstones of internet history? Blizzard CS have no idea. They're ruthlessly right-wing economically, but culturally radically left-wing. Incels and purple-haired freaks. They do nothing about bullying and harassment if the victim has the audacity to fight back. But you think you can make a joke at Israel's expense? Get on the bandwagon. They overlook victim blaming and agitation constantly, and any reprisal is treated as an excuse to escalate. Don't even get me started on the forums. Have you ever wondered how a country, how a culture, can be so sick, so demented, so evil that they have on average 1.3 mass shootings per day? Spend an hour on the WoW forums and you won't be wondering anymore. If you're exposed to Americans, you understand why they kill each other. Through all their actions, Blizzard have made it clear that you should not use the in-game communications or risk having your access denied because they retroactively decided they don't like what you've said. Their end-user agreements and codes of conduct are intentionally vague in order to give them latitude to action any user for any actual chat.
There are a lot of roaches in Texas.
All of this bureaucracy and bloat catch a free ride off the backs of the skilled and talented development team. Blizzard as a company and staff are bottom feeders, leeching off the developers. They're essentially parasites. Peak capitalism. Imagine you created all this amazing art, only to have low IQ autistic rejects unilaterally decide who can have and what is appropriate conversation in a game full of 40-year-old men. If you ever give praise for World of Warcraft, you really need to emphasize your praises for the devs and not for the hangers-on, seat warmers and appeasers. I hope Blizzard errs on the side of cautious updates to Era rather than a new season every 18 months or so, but honestly, from what I've seen from Season of Discovery, I was wrong about a bunch of things that I was going to have a fit about before Phase 3. So my mind is a lot more open. Thanks so much for watching. This is my first long-form video essay, and if you like what you've seen, hit the like and subscribe buttons and share to people you think will enjoy. Maybe you're curious about what our shadowy figure friend was alluding to. I could really use your support, so if you'd like to contribute, jump on to baraddekbuilds.com and buy your next PC, or to donate, select your amount from the catalogue to make a one-off contribution and have your name featured in future content.
Getting home from work, I feel like a jerk. I forgot to fucking buy out on that formal white shirt.
Time to get back to fishing. Oh. Oof. Okay, let's... Oh, wow. No. You mad, bro?